Hello, hello, hola, ¿cómo estás? Slow Baja amigos. Today's heaping dose of gratitude goes out to my beautiful wife, Amy, who, I'm going to let you peek behind the curtain here, folks. She's the one. She's the one that keeps the whole Emery family show on the road. She's the one that keeps kids in college, roof over our head, dogs fed, gas in old vehicles. She's the one, and I want to publicly acknowledge it to my Slow Baja compadres. If you're enjoying the show, it's Amy's hard work that allows me to do this. So I just want to say thanks, babe. I am on my way today to Ensenada for the NORA Mexican 1000. I can't believe the year we've had since last year's event where I had to bail out at the last minute to this year's Slow Baja Safari class, sold out, 25 vehicles rolling down the peninsula with me, showing them the way. It's going to be a lot of fun. Follow along at Nora.com. Turtle Wax is sending Sam Hurley down, so you can follow along in stories at Turtle Wax on Instagram, Facebook. It'll be a terrific event, and I cannot wait. Today's show is with Sandra Dibble. Sandra Dibble is a veteran reporter for the San Diego Union-Tribune, now retired from 28 years where she was their Tijuana correspondent. And unlike her colleagues, Sandra lived in Tijuana, and she has produced a beautiful new podcast called Border City. And you can find that wherever you find your podcasts. And I have devoured the first 3 episodes, listened to them all at least twice, if not 3 times, and I've enjoyed it immensely. And on this trip to Baja, I reached out to Sandra, and she was kind enough to meet me yesterday, and we recorded a show where she gets beyond the violence into the beauty and the belonging of Tijuana. And I hope you tune in, and I hope you enjoy it. And without further ado, Sandra Dibble. Hey, this is Michael Emery. Thanks for tuning into the Slow Baja. This podcast is powered by Tequila Fortaleza, handmade in small batches, and hands down, my favorite tequila. Hey, I want to tell you about your new must-have accessory for your next Baja trip. Benchmark Maps has released a beautiful, beautiful Baja California Road and Recreation Atlas. It's a 72-page, large-format book of detailed maps and recreation guides that makes the perfect planning tool for exploring Baja. Pick yours up at benchmarkmaps.com. Sandra Dibble, say hello.
Hello, 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 hello.
There you go. All right,
Okay.
you've got your radio voice on.
Is that right?
You do something, Voice of San Diego? I was reading about you.
Oh, I do. I do this thing called the Border Report at Voice of San Diego. It comes every other week. It's a newsletter. It's not major reporting. It's a newsletter.
Well, you've done major reporting.
I have done major reporting. Yeah. Are we recording yet?
I just turned it on just to make sure. Like last
Okay.
night, I was recording one and I forgot to turn it on.
Oh, okay.
Which is good. It was with a friend,
Okay.
so I could go, false start and turn it on again. So, Sandra, thanks for saying yes and making some time for Slow Baja. And if you don't mind, I'll ask you some questions and you can tell me some answers, and we're turning the tables on a journalist who's usually doing the question asking.
That's true, but I'm looking forward to this.
All right, terrific. Well, it's Slow Baja. I'm in San Diego on my way to the NORA Mexican 1000, and I've been listening to this fabulous new podcast called Border City by Sandra Dibble, and I just had to reach out to her to see if there's any chance that I could get together and talk to her about her life in Tijuana. You've spent, 28 years reporting on the border?
28 years. I came in 1994, and I'm still sort of reporting. I'm dabbling. I'm not full-time reporting anymore.
And you were working for the San Diego Union-Tribune.
Yes, I sort of formally retired from the San Diego Union-Tribune in September of 2020. But I've kept working on this podcast, which has just been released, this month.
And I've listened to all 3 episodes twice and the trailer 3 times.
Thank you.
No, it's really terrific.
We're grateful for every listener.
No,
so
it is really terrific. And I'm often finding myself talking about Tijuana, and I'm not terribly knowledgeable on Tijuana. I have 80s college drinking, blurred memories.
Yeah.
And then I didn't spend any time there for years. And now when I go, it just seems like there's so much happening.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
It's a
there's
city.
the food
and
scene, the music scene, the art scene, the culture. It just seems like it's a place that I want to spend a lot of time.
the sports scene, the Cholo soccer team.
The Cholo soccer team, and you've got baseball there, so I need to
Yes.
get down. Well, let's get the introductions introduced here. Sandra Dibble, you're a veteran reporter for the San Diego Union. You've got this great new podcast. I'm talking to you live in person downtown San Diego, and your editors. We're in the billiards room of your editor's high rise. We've got a fellow getting some miles in on a bicycle there, which you might hear in the background. But Border City Podcast, a podcast about beauty, violence, and belonging in Tijuana. Let's jump into that.
That sums it up, right?
Well, you said you started there in 1994. That was kind of a crazy year.
It was a very big year for Mexico and also the U.S. NAFTA went into, I was launched in January 1994. Bill Clinton was president. In Mexico, that was an election year, and right after I took the job, I hadn't arrived yet. The major presidential candidate was assassinated in Tijuana.
So that was Luis Donaldo Colosio.
Exactly. He was the PRI candidate, which made him basically a shoo-in for the job. So yeah, and he was attending a rally in a sort of a poor working class colonia called Lomas Taurinas, and he was shot there. I was not there. My colleague Greg Gross was, but yeah, and in a way that sort of put Tijuana on the map the way Dallas has been on the map with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. It was a magnicidio, they called it. It put the international spotlight on Tijuana in not a very pleasant way.
Exactly. So 1994, you've got NAFTA in January. You've got the tequila crisis at the end of the year with the devaluation of the peso. You've got the top political candidate for president getting gunned down in April or something, March,
and then
April.
The police chief got.
And then the police chief.
So I got two.
And what else are we forgetting? The
you
rise
know,
of the Arellano Felix cartel, a few other things,
well,
right?
The Arellano Felix cartel had kind of risen by this point, and were extremely powerful. They sort of began to rise in the 80s. And I think here in the 90s, mid-90s, they're at the peak of their power. And it's before they were being arrested or killed one by one. So it was an intense time. I didn't come to cover all this. I didn't come with this idea. I just thought I would be coming and covering a cool city and right next to San Diego. And I did not come with the idea that I was going to be a law enforcement reporter or writing about big crimes. My office mate, Greg Gross, was writing mostly about that, but there was no way of avoiding it because they were so big. We all were called into action when something big happened.
So let's back up for just a little bit. You were born in Egypt.
I was born in Egypt. My dad was a Foreign Service officer, so.
So you've lived a few places.
I have. I was born in Egypt, and my mom was sort of a Swiss Greek from Egypt. And we did move around all my childhood. My early education was in Switzerland and in French, and then seventh grade was in Damascus, Syria. But all my high school has been in the U.S. and college.
And were you fluent in Spanish before you took the post?
No, I mean yes. I was. I'm not native, but I'm pretty fluent. I went to high school in Washington D.C. and I took a really, really excellent Spanish high school class taught by a Spanish Civil War refugee called Guillermina Supervilla, and I just learned to love Spanish in high school and have been speaking it ever since. My formal education ended in high school.
Well, you're the only person who I've ever spoken to who actually learned Spanish in their high school Spanish.
It's true. Nobody is funny.
I wish I had retained some of it. I learned it in the Long Bar in Tijuana, I think, is where I learned to speak Spanish and sip tequila. So you were somewhat prepared. You had some experience around the world, seeing how different societies organize themselves from Switzerland to Syria.
Well, I was a kid. No, more specifically, I went to Columbia Journalism School. I'd worked at UPI in Mexico City for a summer. Then I worked for 10 years in Miami. Then I worked for 3 years at National Geographic. And when I was at National Geographic, I covered the Oaxaca story. I wrote the Oaxaca story for them. And I had a fellowship, which this was key, at USC in the late 80s. It was a year-long fellowship where we spent like 9 months on campus at USC and then 3 months in Mexico. So that it was just being immersed in the history and the politics of Mexico.
And you said, so when you say you wrote the Oaxaca story, you wrote the Oaxaca story for National Geographic.
I did.
So you've got some real chops.
Yeah.
If I can flatter you early on in the podcast.
But then come the zingers, right?
Yeah,
but that's
no,
okay.
I'm not big on the zingers. So again, getting to this posting, 1994, were you working for the San Diego Union-Tribune in, was it the Union and the Tribune, separate newspapers at that time?
No, but by then they'd combined. They were the Union-Tribune. There was the evening and the morning paper.
Right,
by the time they'd already been combined for like 5 years or something.
Yeah, they were separate when I was a college kid down here. So were you working for one of the Union in D.C., or did you get hired to become the...
Oh, no, I was at the National Geographic. I left my job to come and take this job here in Tijuana to cover the Tijuana Bureau, which was just a little dusty little office in Tijuana with 2 people. So,
well, about that time, Tijuana came out as the most violent city in the world.
Back then already?
Was it then? When did that come in? Was that late 90s?
Violence was kind of bubbling up. I don't remember all these classifications about Tijuana being the most violent city until...
So this is what I'm getting to.
Yeah,
so when you took this job, how did you explain it to your family? I'm going to Tijuana. What was the impression? I mean, if you said you were going to San Diego, people have sunny, they've seen it on TV, they know it's lovely. You know, it's going to be great, Sandra. But you say you're going to Tijuana when you're talking to your family in D.C. I'm imagining they're saying, what are you thinking?
Probably. I mean, it was mostly my mother, probably, who was not thinking it was a great idea. It was a bit like, jumping off the deep end. But I did it, so...
Well, we just recapped a little bit of the 1994 violence, and your podcast setup is a podcast about beauty, violence, and belonging. So let's get on to, I just want to say I'm intrigued by the beauty and the belonging part.
Yeah.
The other part of the story we've heard.
We've heard it, yes.
Yeah,
but maybe you'll hear it a different way in this podcast, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so as well. But let's get on to the beauty and the belonging.
Okay.
I think you've shared a little bit about, on the podcast, you've shared a little bit about the friends you've made there.
I have.
The people who've taken you in as family.
Which has made all the difference. I mean, Tijuana is not just a story to me, right? It's a life. So, yeah.
So let's jump into a little bit of that. Your arrival, you're working in a dusty little office, as you said. Are your colleagues from the paper residing in Tijuana? Are you the only one?
I'm the only one. Gregory Gross was there at the time, and he was covering the Arellanos and doing more law enforcement coverage, and he would drive down every day from San Diego. And then there was a photographer called John Gibbons who had been covering the border for a long time. He was also based in San Diego. So really, we were the core. And then there was an editor who was very passionate about the border called Aida Bustos working out of San Diego.
And what made you decide to live there?
Oh, wow. Because I was making such a drastic move, so I thought I had to just do it all the way. I mean, I'd already been a local reporter, and so if I came to Tijuana, I could be a foreign correspondent, right? It's the same job, right? Except I could.
You just flip it around.
Yeah.
Now
I'm a foreign correspondent.
I love it. All right. And so back to the beauty and the belonging.
Uh-huh.
You've been taken in by your housekeeper.
Yeah.
She
took care of me.
Maybe named a child after you.
Her grandchild.
Her grandchild.
Yeah.
Probably named after you.
I think so.
You're blushing.
Yeah, Sandrita. Yeah.
So tell me about the family.
Oh, so when I came, I don't know, I lived in this kind of nice neighborhood, an apartment overlooking the golf course. The one thing I did things like I really came to Tijuana sight unseen. I mean, I had been there once, like 5 years ago for the day, but I really didn't know anybody. So I thought I can't move to Tijuana unless I find a place where I feel safe. I'm not moving here. And so we found this building, and it had automatic garage door openers, and it looked safe enough. So it was a nice building. It was mostly houses, and there was this like maybe 6-unit apartment building. So I ended up renting there. And then I thought, well, I need someone to help me clean. And I guess I'm not the neatest person in the world. So she came, and she showed up. She was the sister-in-law of a woman who was cleaning another apartment in the building. And so she came, and she was just a lovely woman. And then I realized, she was taking 2 taxis, maybe 3 taxis from her colonia, and then she was walking up the hill, which would be at least a mile, and then she was cleaning my house, and then she faced doing that in reverse, right? So I would just, I didn't have anything to do. I didn't know anyone. And so I said, well, if you want to ride home. And I was curious, too. It was like, where do you live? What's it like? And so then I ended up driving her home, and so we became friends that way.
And you got some insights into the economics, the pressures of people who are coming from other parts of Mexico who have family issues that they're fleeing or needing to go someplace else so they can support that family back home, and she was one of them.
Yeah, she was the oldest, I think, of 11 kids, and her father was a weaver in Michoacan, and he had fallen ill. And so she took off, and it was a different period, but she took off, and I guess she had already a job in a house in Tijuana, cleaning a house. There's a Mexican movie called Roma that talks about that that fact. People who leave their impoverished communities, and then they come and they work in wealthy people's houses. So she did that for a while, and then she kind of decided she didn't want to live in the house, and she, met a man, and they married, and so then she stopped working for them full time.
Describe her house a little bit.
It was in this place called Cañón de Science, and the funny thing about Tijuana is that it has all these little canyons. So it's a big city, but then you drive up a canyon, and to get there it was like a long unpaved road, and it felt like a village. It felt more like this rural village than part of Tijuana, and you would hear roosters crow and dogs bark, and it was just pretty much a wooden shack, but she made it a home, and I don't know if they had sewage yet. They didn't have a paved road. Now they do, I think, at that house, because I've returned since then. They didn't have hot water, so you would heat the water, and that's how you'd heat it outside on a wood fire, and that's how you would bathe. So it was a pretty rustic living, and then, the contrast between her house and my house, and it was just such a different life.
Yeah, I'm assuming there wasn't indoor running water and plumbing if they're heating water outdoors.
They had tambos, right? So they would I can't remember, because Tijuana was getting water fairly extensively. I can't remember if when I first came, but they did have these big tambos in a lot of parts of Tijuana where a truck called a pipa would come and deliver the water. So it was, pretty undeveloped. That neighborhood it was poor, undeveloped, but it felt kind of peaceful when I was there.
And how did her life change in the years that you were there?
Well, she was a very determined woman, and so she had 4 kids, and she was determined that she would leave each of her children a property. So she kept moving around Tijuana to poor neighborhoods, but she had that property, then she moved to a second property, and then a third property. So she had 3 properties for at least her 3 daughters. I can't remember. I don't know what the 4th was, but so then she moved from the Cañón del Science to a place called Mariano Matamoros, which is in eastern Tijuana, and then an even newer area called El Pipila. So she moved around. She was the wife of a guy who's called a calafiero, and calafieros are the bus drivers. So they're sort of tribal, Calafieros. It seems like all these families, all the brothers-in-law are all Calafieros. So he was a Calafiero. So how did her life change? Well, her daughters grew up, and of course she had hopes for them, and they got pregnant young, and it was not easy, but she, well, you'll have to listen. You'll have to listen. I can't give it all away.
You'll hear it all in the podcast.
I can't give it all away.
Yeah, exactly. So they spent some time coming to your house.
Yeah.
Sometimes just standing at your kitchen sink, probably marveling at the luxuries that you probably just took for granted.
Well, the girls did. I mean, the mother had probably worked in a nice house, but the girls, right. The girls would come, and she was a really loving mother, and also they did things together, so they would come and work with her, and keep her company.
Well, again, I keep coming back to this. This balance of violence and beauty. So the news business is it bleeds, it leads. So
right. Well,
and how did you find that did you have an internal barometer that made you want to find smaller stories, beautiful stories, tell the other side of the story? There's I don't think I was the kind of reporter that measured herself by how many page one stories she got. That wasn't my driving force. I mean, that wasn't what drove me to Tijuana, that I want to write all these big stories and be on the front page. What drove me more to Tijuana is I want to be way out of the way and have the freedom to decide what stories to write and to maybe find the stories no one else is writing. Well, that's the next question I had. Yeah. How did your stories come to you? Did you have an editor? You'd mentioned Jim, who we met on the way in. I met on the way in. You had an editor. How did assignments come your way?
Well, some, of course, no reporters ever just completely on their own when they work for a newspaper. Some were assigned. Some were obvious, like when the police chief is killed, you're not going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm doing this feature," right? You jump. So some were the obvious news stories, and then stories that I get assigned some. One of the big themes of the time was sort of binational relations. There was a group called San Diego Dialogue, and it was made up of sort of business, civic leaders on both sides of the border, and they were looking for ways to make the border more efficient. They were like, I don't know how to say, the barons of both sides, but the border is always what keeps San Diego and Tijuana from being one community, right? And how fluid the border is critical to basically it's a lifeline for both sides. People need to get to their jobs, but people also want to go shopping, and if the border has too long a wait time, then people can't cross. Anyway, so I would cover a lot of those kinds of stories. There'd be themes. What's interesting is Tijuana and San Diego share a watershed. I always thought the environmental stories were interesting. Tijuana, there's a border, and yet Tijuana and San Diego share a watershed. It's the Tijuana River watershed. And so if it rains, it flows on both sides. And if there's a sewage spill in Tijuana, it flows down by gravity, it flows into the estuary, in the Tijuana estuary, which is in San Diego. So I thought those things were just really interesting to cover, and just culture and political change. There was so much else to cover because when I came, Tijuana and Baja California was really at the, how can I say, punto de lanza is the word in Spanish, but
the tip of the spear.
The tip of the spear of political change in Mexico. Mexico had been governed for decades by the Institutional Revolutionary Party, but in Baja California, the first opposition governor was elected in 1989. His name was Ernesto Rufo. So he was still governor. He had a 6-year term. So by the time I came, he was in his last year. So the PAN and the whole idea of an opposition and a two-party rule was really new. And it wasn't until 2000 when Vicente Fox wins the presidency that the PAN, that Mexico really became a two-party system. Now we're at a different time. Now it's Morena, neither the PRI nor the PAN. And now I've lost track of your question.
It's all right. It's good time to insert a little break here for Baja Bound and tell people that if they're heading to Tijuana, if they're driving, if they're heading south, they're going to want to get some insurance, and Baja Bound is the place to get it. So we're going to take a quick break. Here at Slow Baja, we can't wait to drive our old Land Cruiser south of the border. And when we go, we'll be going with Baja Bound Insurance. Their website's fast and easy to use. Check them out at bajabound.com. That's bajabound.com, serving Mexico travelers since 1994.
You know what's really hard? It's like, so I told the story, and the most scary, maybe you even want this on tape, but the scariest part was like, well, what's your story about? And if anybody ever asked me that, I'd like go into a complete anxiety attack, because like, I don't know what my story's about. And then I go to my editor, do you know what our story's about? It's like, I don't know what the story's about. And so I think you have to learn to tell the story of your story. And that's what's I'm learning, You
got to tell your story of your story. People always ask me what Slow Baja is about, and I say, I don't know.
Right.
It's a sharing the beauty of Baja, one podcast at a time. You got to tell your story. You got to tell the story of your story. Well, we're back with Sandra Dibble telling the story of her story. And one of the things that you said that struck, that stayed with me here is, you say that Tijuana is a city both cursed and enriched by its proximity to the U.S. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Wow. Well, and on the enriched side, it's right. It's right next to probably one of the wealthiest states in the nation, in the U.S. There's job opportunities. There's educational opportunities. There's tons of kids who live in Tijuana but were born in the U.S. who are truly binational, who go to San Diego State, who go to Southwestern, who have the opportunity to live on both sides of the border. There's business opportunities. It's a place of great opportunity. Trade, it's one of the busiest trade crossing points, but it's also cursed because it's right in a drug corridor. It's like the most lucrative drug corridor on the U.S. Mexico border. So drug trafficking organizations are sort of constantly fighting over it. Like, who's going to control the flow of illicit drugs into the U.S.? And that has been really the cause of violence. And increasingly now, Tijuana and probably other border cities has a rising consumption problem. Meth, I believe, but now not meth, just fentanyl. Fentanyl is now a new one and really dangerous one. So that's a curse. Migration is also a big issue. For instance, deportations, a lot have happened through Tijuana, and then sort of the city is like, where do they go? You have all these people who are back in Mexico for the first time in 30 years, and they don't even speak Spanish. So Tijuana has to absorb them, or else, help figure out how they can go home, or maybe they want to try to get back across the border. So there's just so much that being right there at this crossroads implies for the city. It's not like, Des Moines, Iowa, which I'm sure is interesting, but has other issues.
Shout out to Des Moines.
I've never been there, but I'd like to.
I've driven through.
Oh.
So, yes, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And getting on to the drugs and violence part again, which always dominates the story. If we didn't have the desire for the products, they wouldn't be shooting each other to supply us with the products.
And if we didn't, if the weapons didn't come south,
they
wouldn't have the weapons to shoot each other.
They're not making them there. They're buying them the states and bringing them there.
Yes.
So Tijuana is dangerous. Is Tijuana dangerous?
I think that is dangerous is so relative. That is a good question, and then it's sort of a question I've really wrestled with kind of the entire time I've been there. Is Tijuana dangerous? Then, why has it not at different points felt that dangerous to me, right? I think danger is relative to who you are. If you are, hey, are you crossing to buy drugs? Well, maybe it's dangerous. Are you crossing to sell drugs or with weapons? Are you going into neighborhoods that you don't know? Are you getting lost? Are you somehow putting yourself in harm's way? Then I think it can be dangerous. I think you have to go, if you are a foreigner and you don't know the city, you have to just think about where you're going and what you're doing. But, there's no reason you can't go to Avenida Revolucion or the Rio Zone and get a great meal. There is no reason that should be dangerous.
So I think what you're saying is it's mainly dangerous to those in the trade. That it's danger on, it's violence on violence. It's targeted. It's targeted,
but also it's dangerous to journalists. It is dangerous to journalists. It's dangerous to law enforcement officials. So it is dangerous. But I also think it can. I've written enough stories about things that happen to Americans who, I don't know, are in the wrong place.
Wrong place, the wrong time.
That can happen. Wrong place, wrong time. Or what are you doing in this neighborhood? What are you looking for? Just be really aware. Be aware of where you're going. I would think you'd do that in any country that you didn't know. I was in Cairo, Egypt, and that could be scary, when you're lost. I think getting lost, that is scary. Because I do think there are people who prey on people in any country. People know how to spot who's vulnerable.
Yeah, it could happen here in San Diego or Los Angeles, yes, or parts of San Francisco.
It could. Yeah. You just have to be aware. Then in Mexico there's a language problem, but so many people speak English, so it's not that much of a problem. So I do think Tijuana has a lot to offer visitors, and they should just sort of consider how they go and where they go, and have a great time.
Do you want to get into some of that? Where to go, how to go, and having a great time in Tijuana?
Yeah. Well, I think, there's a certain, landmarks. The Secut, which is about, you could actually walk there from the border. It'd be a little walk, but there's all these taxis at the border that'll take you to the Tijuana Cultural Center. It shouldn't be more than $5 to get there. And that's just a really good starting place. It's like Balboa Park for Tijuana. It's like where you have theater, you have concerts, you have a museum, you have art exhibits, you have a little cafe, and you're right next to a big shopping mall, and you're in the Rio Zone. That puts you in the Rio Zone, which is where there's a lot of good restaurants. You're also a stone's throw away, really, from the Mercado Hidalgo, which is this old style Mexican market. Tijuana's not like going to the center of Mexico, but there's little pieces of it that will remind you of I'm in Mexico, like the Hidalgo market with all the, piñatas and the Mexican food and the smells and all the chilies in big stalls. I think it's an interesting place. I think Avenida Revolucion has become increasingly interesting. Like all the cafes, it's gotten more hipster. When I first came, it was just more the traditional Southern California families, tourists coming, or the Navy guys coming to get drunk, right? And that really, that ended. And so I think Avenida Revolucion is actually kind of a lot more interesting now than it used to be.
That's my take exactly. I'm not the kid that I was going to the Long Bar or to, the various Avenue Revolucion bars for the nightlife, and again, we were always kind of seeking out places that the other college kids weren't in, or the Navy guys weren't in, or whatever.
Oh, well, that makes it more interesting.
Yeah, where you could be accepted a little bit by these locals who are also, we were part and parcel of their earning a living.
Well, they're also curious about you, right? They wanted to learn English.
To sit down and to sip tequila with the local at the bar, Dandy del Sur and a few other places.
Oh, Dandy del Sur, that's an amazing place.
You should light up when we talk about it. So I'm talking about there in the later 80s, middle 80s, later 80s. But then not to have gone for a very long time, and to have started going back here and there over the last 2 years after I started this podcast. I really think that Tijuana for Tijuanenses is much, much more interesting than all the silly souvenir stalls and all the cheap drinks and other places that were catered only to people coming in from north of the border.
That's true. And, when there was a lot of violence in Tijuana and there was recession and back the 2008, 9, 10 period, what really changed the narrative, because there was only one narrative, at least about the city, that most journalists on both sides of the border were writing about, which was the violence, the drug violence. But then suddenly these bloggers started coming in, and they were led by a guy from L.A. called Bill Esparza. And he started doing food tours. He's a food guy. And suddenly, like the story became food, because what happened when tourists stopped coming, like there were chefs like Javier Plasencia started doing things like, hey, what can we do here in our city for Tijuanenses? And I think this food scene was transformative for Tijuana, for Baja California, for the identity of the region. It's tremendously creative. It's the city's in the crosswinds of so many cultural influences. So you have, Baja Med, which is, I guess, Baja, fresh local ingredients, but also kind of a Mediterranean. And then you have the Valle de Guadalupe, and that was also part of the food scene, the wine and the food. And it's an amazing place, and the food still to this day it's an amazing place to go out to eat right now.
Yeah, so walk me through a typical day in Sandra Dibble's life as a reporter for the San Diego Union living in Tijuana. I've heard through your podcast you spent time taking tennis lessons and then going to the office, and either a food vendor would come in with the beautiful fruit plates, sprinkled with lime and chili, or you'd go out to a taco stand. Or tell me a little bit about where you went, what you ate, what a day was like, what the cultural parts were when law enforcement officials or drug kingpins weren't getting shot outside your front door.
They weren't getting shot outside the front door, but we were just like 3 blocks from the state attorney general's office, so that you always had the press conferences. We were right there. We could just walk to press conferences.
Did you have a driver, or would you drive yourself?
No.
Did you hail a taxi cab?
No, I had my car.
You had a car?
I had a car.
Okay.
I had a car. At first it was my own car, and then I had a company car, I think. So I can't remember, but no, I drove. I lived about 3 miles from the office, so it was easy. You just drive down the hill, and then I would park at the office, and usually we'd try to pick up. This is before much internet, right? So we'd try to pick up the papers.
There was a time, kids.
Yeah.
There was a time where we just read newspapers. That's how we got the news.
We'd buy maybe 3 or 4 newspapers, and then we'd kind of sort of see what was going on. If there was any breaking news that we had to cover, then that tended to be more the law enforcement stuff, and then Mexican colleagues would tell us. I did a lot of enterprise stuff. The more memorable stuff was just enterprise and just looking for stories that weren't being told.
And tell me about your story. your story, playing tennis in the morning.
Oh, no, I would go,
Coffee
actually,
with
I don't
friends.
know if it was okay, well, I did find, you kind of look for the familiar, even though I'd moved from Washington, D.C., I grew up playing tennis, so Tijuana's not a big tennis town, but there are some courts, and there was a public, it's called the Ciudad Deportiva, it's off the Via Rápida, and there was a guy, an old guy called El Profe, and he must have been like over 80 or whatever, but he was he was quite in shape, and so I took tennis lessons from him, and and it was a way, I had to fill my day with stuff because I didn't know anybody, right? So then I actually used to go take aerobics at the Casa de la Cultura, and that was a different part of town, and then I took this really great class in the ecology of Baja California. And then we would do weekend field trips. That was my favorite part. And we would just go outside Ensenada into La Rumorosa, and we'd get, lessons in the ecology of the region, the different flora and fauna and what was native to the region. And it was fascinating. And plus, the really fun thing was just meeting everybody else who was in the class. And I ended up going hiking with them after that. That was just a really wonderful, wonderful group of people. Because we'd have picnics. It was like Girl Scouts, but adults.
It was community.
Yeah, it was a community. So so that was one of my first communities. These guys, I would go, on. It would be in my class, and then so some of my earliest friends were journalists, and one friend, Dora Elena Cortez, and then she introduces me to her sister, and then they, bit by bit, you make friends and you build a circle.
And did your journalist colleagues take you in immediately, treat you as a sister in the business, or did you have to break in, so to speak?
No.
Were they surprised to see a gringa?
Well, because I was new, they were surprised. They already knew Greg Rose. No, there's been a long tradition of San Diego Union-Tribune reporters working in Baja California. I was just the latest. I was just kind of a newbie. But, wow, there'd been like this guy called Fernando Romero, and he was Mexican, and he had grown up in Tijuana, so he was a legend. There was Nancy Cleveland. There was John Gibbons, there were photographers. I mean, there's been a whole tradition at the Union-Tribune of journalists who really love Mexico and love the border and love covering it, and I am one more. So but what was different was that they went home at the end of the day, and I didn't. I was still around, so I was more available, and that's kind of when I became more involved. KPBS had Carrie Kahn, so she and I, and we'd party with the Mexican journalists, and it was fun. Yeah.
And find culture, and find opera, and symphony, and orchestra, and all these things that people don't traditionally say, that's there. Really? Right.
Because I come from D.C. and I'd kind of grown up in a house that played. My mother played. I'm not a musician. I don't have musical training, but I grew up listening to a lot of classical music. So it's funny, you leave and then you look for what's familiar, like tennis. And then I looked for, there's classical music recitals. So there were the Baja California Orchestra was founded in the early 90s after the breakup of the Soviet Union. And a lot of the musicians came from Ukraine and Russia. So there was this great culture.
How are they getting along now?
I beg your pardon?
How are they getting along now? There's an interesting story.
Well, it's changed, and now the conductor is, conductor has always been Mexican. There's been a Cuban guy, but a lot of the musicians have moved on to San Diego, but there's still Ukrainian and Russian musicians in the orchestra.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Anyway, it's, I think you can kind of find whatever your interest is. Had I been a soccer fan or a baseball fan, I would have discovered a different Tijuana, right? But you kind of got to go with where your interests lead you.
And your interests have, excuse me, mm-hmm. You said you have to go where your interests lead you. And I'm prying for the beauty and the belonging still. We've heard about the violence. And I'm trying to get to that period that you saw late 90s, early 2000s, this food explosion happens. Anthony Bourdain goes to...
That was more, I think that was more 2010, 12.
Okay.
Yeah. Early 2000s, I don't think Tijuana had been discovered for food. I think that happened during that 2008, very violent 2008-9 period when people in global recession.
Right.
And, people weren't visiting anymore. And that was where Tijuana turned inward, as opposed to like, hey, let's cater to the tourists. It's like, okay, they're not coming. What can we do for ourselves?
Do you have any favorites? Any places that you remember from that period fondly? That
back
being
then,
just surprised by that level of...
Yeah, and it was...
I don't want to say culinary perfection, but that level of execution with those amazing ingredients that are coming from right there.
Yeah, okay. I'm not a big food connoisseur, and I'm really happy if you take me to some good tacos. And Tijuana is a great town for street food. But the one that blew my mind was Misión 19. That was Javier Plasencia's
Mission
place.
19.
Yeah, Mission 19. It was, it was an amazing place, and it surprised me. It really did, because there are a lot of really great, like his family has all these sort of Italian-style restaurants, and there are Mexican restaurants. There's one called Cien Años, of more kind of traditional Mexican cuisine. But this was like something like I'd never tried before, and amazing combinations of food.
Beautiful and a little glamorous.
And glamorous, and then you had the wines from the Valle de Guadalupe, and that was one, but then there were others. There's La Diferencia, which is more traditional. There's La Querencia. There's many more. I'm not really up to date on the latest cuisine. But it's happening, I know.
It's happening. All right. Well, we're going to get into a little bit of a lightning round here, Sandra, as we head towards the finish line. What's your advice? If somebody wants to go to Tijuana for a day trip, or maybe an overnight in a hotel, stay at Caesars. I mean, do you have any thoughts on how would you describe Tijuana for a tourist?
I think in some ways Tijuana is a hard city to access. And it's not like it's so... back then there used to be more tourists coming from San Diego. I think, how would I describe? I think it's an amazing city, and there's so much to discover. I think I would first read up. I would say, okay, what is my interest? Do I want to go to a soccer game? Do I want to see an art gallery? Do I want to just go for a good meal? Do I want to go to a concert of the Baja California Orchestra? What is my interest? And then kind of work from there. I think ideally, the best of all possible worlds is, do you have a Mexican friend? Could they, maybe introduce you? If you don't, there are tours. I've found, actually, there's a guy, he does this calafia cultural, and once a month he sort of fills a bus, but a bus of about 20 people, and he takes you, and it's almost everybody's there is from Tijuana, and it's about 400 pesos, which is about $20, and you get to see places that you didn't even know existed in Tijuana. Driving around with this guy. So I love tours. I love tours because they make you see things that you never saw before. There used to be Turista Libre, and Derek Chin. I don't know if he's still doing it. I think we're like on the cusp of more things like that happening, more opportunities again for cross-border travel and tours. Post-COVID, I think people want to rediscover Tijuana. There's so much going on. Say you like jazz. There's a jazz scene. And wow, I mean, now with the internet, you can really check things out.
Well, I was going to say, Instagram is chocked full of people who seem to be touting where to eat and what to do in Tijuana. Tell me about how the podcast came about. How did Border City come to fruition?
Okay, well, I was kind of nearing, what happened is first I broke my foot, and that sort of had me sidelined for a couple months. And it was like, well, how much longer am I?
Hey, we were just wrapping up, and I was asking about the nuts and bolts of the podcast, and you said you worked on it for 3 years, more or less.
3 years from start to finish, because we did a couple things like, hey, we could do a story about an opera singer. And then we started looking, and talked to the opera singer, and so we brought back a proposal. It wasn't at first going to be about me. It was going to be using my knowledge. And then, we could do one about deportees. And then I went and researched deportees. And then they thought, no, how about if it was about you? So that's sort of how it came about. It didn't come from me. It came from the editors. So, 3 years from start to like, okay, now you're full-time on this. So my last 1.5 years of working at the Union-Tribune were working on this. Then I just kept working on it. I mean, on my own, pretty much.
So recovered from your broken foot. I'm not sure if that made the last cut of the
I broke my
previous.
foot.
You broke your foot. You realized you couldn't chase the migrant tsunami that came from Central America.
It was the Central American caravan that brought thousands of people to Tijuana, and chasing, chasing after them, kind of traipsing through the migrant camp. I would do it, but with much trepidation. I was always thinking about my foot and that I didn't want to twist it again. And you know what? I mean, it's true. I mean, a journalist is sort of a young person's profession. I kept doing it. It's kind of like being a patrol officer. It's that same like feeling of you're on the street and you're where it's all happening. But, most patrol officers then become sergeants, and then sergeants become captains. And I never did. I stayed, but some people just stay patrol officers all their careers, and I did too.
You stayed Private Dibble your whole career.
Yes, I did. Officer Dibble, right.
Well, Sandra, it's been delightful getting to know you a little bit through listening to your podcast. How has the response been, and how has your life changed? People have been reading you for years. National Geographic stories. That's no easy feat. That's a major milestone. I'm assuming you worked on that Oaxaca story for months and months and months and months.
No, the Oaxaca was actually, it was 2 months in Oaxaca, 2 months writing it, and then probably 2 months editing it. So probably
months and months and months. That's 6 months.
6 months.
6 months on one story. We had
this took longer though.
When I was a young photographer, we had a photographer who had just done a National Geographic story when you were still shooting film in those days, and he talked about the months that he spent on the story and the amount of film that he's spent on the story, and basically the ratio of published photographs in the magazine was one photograph about every 100 rolls of film.
Yeah, well, I mean,
phenomenal.
That the magazine is more about the photography than the text.
All right, so you just slid in with 6 months of hard work.
Yeah.
So getting back to, you've got 8 episodes of the podcast, and it was a good long stretch of time, a couple years, to get this put together, figuring out what the story was, how to tell the story.
And then getting interviews.
Getting the interviews, and we're at about the 1/3 mark now. You've got the 3 stories out. How's your life changed? You've got Gustavo Arellano promoting you on the LA Times podcast, or you've got Slow Baja calling you up, begging you to get together on a moment's notice. What's happening in your life? Is it feeling kind of exciting?
Yeah, it's a little wild. It's a little mind blowing. I'm not someone whose ambition has been to be in the public eye, because I'm like everybody else. I want my own private life.
You're a reporter. You're telling the story.
I'm telling other people's stories, and now, I'm telling my story, which I probably wouldn't do if I was 40 years old. Because reporters shouldn't be telling their stories. I mean, unless that's what they do, unless they're that kind of reporter. But if you're a traditional print reporter, it's not about you, it's about other people.
Right.
So this is the end of my career, and so this is why I allow myself to do it, and I do it with a purpose. I don't do it like, listen to my story. I do it so that, like, look at this amazing city we're next to. Why don't you discover something about it, or maybe you'll feel something different about it if you see it through my eyes.
Well, that's certainly the way that I feel about the 3 shows that I've listened to 3 times now.
Thank you.
So where can people find the show? What's the best way? I'm going to let you promote it for a second. Bang the drum.
It's on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Spotify, Apple. You can leave a 5-star review. Yes. Yeah. And the LA Times Daily Podcast is doing a nice job in promoting it, and San Diego Union-Tribune.
Yes, there's the homepage is actually on the San Diego Union-Tribune, but I don't know if you need to be a subscriber.
SanDiegoUnionTribune.com, I think, is where
it's SanDiegoUnionTribune.com/Border City. But I'm not sure if you have access to it if you're not a subscriber. But
maybe behind a paywall, folks.
It may be, but maybe not.
Okay.
So check it out.
And how do you interact with the greater world these days as you're easing into retirement and you're not, you're doing your one stint of telling Sandra's story as Sandra tells Tijuana's story. So I'm being a little facetious here. I really feel like you're telling the story of your experience in Tijuana, which I think is a beautiful story. It's not, I don't feel like you're telling your story of, hey, look at me, I was here.
Yeah.
But if people are interested in learning more about you, interacting with you, if you are having any of that, where are you found? Twitter, social
medias? I'm on
medias?
Twitter. Oh, yeah, I do have a Twitter. It's at Sandra Dibble. I think maybe at Sandra Dibble. Yeah, that's me on Twitter. Because Instagram, I think I'm at Sandra Dibble 1. I have an email, sandradibblenews at gmail.com.
Okay.
So
I'll have those in the show notes, folks, if you want.
I like responses. I like to hear from people, especially people I haven't heard from, and just like, wow, I've just touched somebody new. I'm not just writing this for my friends,
That's right. You touched Slow Baja, and here we are.
Yeah, what a thrill.
All right. Well, Sandra, I really appreciate you making some time and telling the story of Tijuana, and I really would love to close it up with get behind the, it's how do I say it? Get behind the headlines. There's a whole incredible city there full of amazing people and magnificent food and things to see and do and go to. And I think you've been a great ambassador of that. So I'm imploring folks to get behind the headlines and go see Sandra Dibble's Tijuana.
And meet people and make your own Tijuana, right? Find your own Tijuana.
Find your own Tijuana. We're going to leave it right there.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed that show with Sandra Dibble. She is really, really a pro veteran reporter. Border City, download it, rate it, review it. Sandra Dibble can't say strongly enough how much I've enjoyed her podcast. 4 episodes in, so we're about halfway into the 8-episode run that took her about 3 years to put together. If you like what I'm doing here, well, I'm going to say rate it, review it, hit it on iTunes, hit that 5-star, say something nice. Spotify, you folks over there on Spotify have your chance to leave your mark. Hit your 5-star review, say something nice about me, and I really appreciate it. Also important is to just send the show to a friend. Copy a link to a show you like and just send it to one of your Baja buddies and say, hey, are you checking out Slow Baja? It really does help, and I really do appreciate it. So please, thank you for sharing the show and rating the show. SlowBaja.com. We've got shirts in all sizes. We've got hats in all styles. Stickers in all shapes and sizes. It's not going to last for long, folks. I'm in Mexico right now for the Nora Mexican 1000. Orders are coming in. I'll be taking care of those when I get back in the middle of May. But if you want something, if you want to rep Slow Baja, and dang it, I really love that you do, get that order in, because those shirts are going to be gone and I'm going to be broke and I'm not going to be able to print them for another 6 months. So get them in now. Get those orders in while that merchandise is in stock. I appreciate you. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week to the new fun show. So until then, to paraphrase my good friend Steve McQueen, lover of Baja, Baja is life. Anything that happens before or after is just waiting. Have I told you about my friend True Miller? You've probably heard the podcast, but let me tell you, her vineyard, Adobe Guadalupe Winery, is spectacular. From the breakfast at her communal table, bookended to an intimate dinner at night, their house-bred Azteca horses, Solomon the horseman, will get you on a ride that'll just change your life. The food, the setting, the pool, it's all spectacular. AdobeGuadalupe.com. For appearing on Slow Baja today, our guest will receive the beautiful Benchmark Map 72-page Baja Road and Recreation Atlas. Do not go to Baja without this, folks. You never know when your GPS is going to crap out, and you're going to want a great map in your lap. Trust me.